Good afternoon. We're going to be waiting for a few seconds to get more people joining, and then we will start. Well, good afternoon. For those who are going to be listening to this in Spanish, allow me to speak a few words in English for those who are going to be listening that through the interpreter. Welcome to this event. Será en español. If you want to hear the English interpretation, well, thank you, everyone. Welcome to this is the fifth event looking for the political center in Colombia. As you know, or some of you know, we have had sessions with Humberto de la Calle, Juan Manuel Galán, Juanito Roberto, Juan Fernando Cristo, and now we have the Congresswoman Ángela Robledo, and we'll start in 1 minute. And we're always here co-sharing with Sandra Borda, an honor for the council, uh, sharing her ideas and understanding and making all of this with her. We have three events for the future, in the immediate future. Tomorrow, we'll have another one for interpreting the elections for the constituent in Chile, and with a panel of experts in Chile, 4 members. May 27th, we'll have the sixth session for looking for the center with Sergio Fajardo. That's going to be at 10 a.m. Colombian time, 11 uh, Eastern Standard Time in Toronto, of course. And on April 7th, Monday, we're going to have the event interpreting the results of the elections in Peru. Welcome, as always. We offer all of this for free to all our followers. We can start. And thank you, Sandra, for being with us. Thank you, Angela, for being with us. We understand that you're very worried and busy with some things in Colombia. So it's a pleasure to welcome you to this webinar from the Canadian Council. So Sandra, I think that we can start, and if you want to start, go ahead. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Angela. Thank you for the invitation to be a co-host for this event, and thank you to everyone who's with us. And I'd start by asking you, Angela, the same I've asked everybody else. This is what is your comparative advantage? What is the vision for your central coalition? What is the mission of your presence here? I'll give you a little context for those who are here and some of the listeners and hearers. Give it the she was the vice president candidate for Gustavo Petro. She belonged to Colombia Humana, and she's done her traffic towards the coalition La Esperanza. This brings a lot of things with it. That's why I'm starting by that. What do you bring under your arm? Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Ken, and you, Sandra, Martha, and thank the Canadian Council for the Americas for dealing with these issues. Well, what do I bring? Well, I come and go because I was in the Green Party at the time, and when I was there, I helped. I was part of a committee that opened a space at the group of progressives, which expresses Gustavo Petro became part of the Green Party because the Green Party what has had a origin in a demobilization of M19. Let's not forget that. And in that transit, we've had very close relationship between the Green Party, Colombia Humana, and now with the coalition of La Esperanza. So I went to left. I went with Gustavo, and I was with the more of the leftist expression of the Green Party, which is also has one. The agenda of the Colombian was much coherent with what I could say in 2018, which was the Colombia coalition, Colombia, and then I came back to this coalition. Why was I invited? Well, I was invited again by the Greens. They asked me, Ángela Maria, come back to the Green Party. We always recognize you. You did a very uh, close job to what we wanted to plan, care for the planet, diverse economy, women. So we invite you to come back and be part of this La Esperanza. And this is a debate. This is a debate because in these liberal expressions like we have there, more of a center, also there, both Ángela Robledo and myself are people, but we have ideas. We can express perhaps more of a leftist task that in Colombia depends the development of the social state and that we have established in our constitution. And I also think, and that's why I was invited, a feminist agenda, which has been one of my bets in Congress. We're at that idea of looking for a programmatic DNA at La Esperanza with the possibility in the midst of all these differences is finding a niche where we mm, be more emphatic on this presidential hope for 20 July. So along with that logic, how would you define from your political ideological point of view, what makes you right now makes you feel more uh, at home here? The feminists, Sandra, we think that it's very important to have some transforming ideas in a country like ours, but where the what is very important, but the why or the how is also as important. And the interesting things I see in La Esperanza, which was one of the reasons why I left Colombia Humana, is what you can intuit as practices for the governors. Uh, a bet on more pluralistic idea, more collective. I would say that there are programmatic issues that you can identify as common in what the historic park and the coalition of La Esperanza. But there's a differentiating item here. That there is a collective a bit from a group of people who, because of their job and could create a team to offer Colombia not a figure, not an outstanding figure, like Gustavo Petro, but rather a much collective bet in a country which hasn't had that experience. You know that here we have many more uh, personalities than ideas. So I think that's a difference, and I think when I speak about feminizing the power, that's what I mean. We need some uh, leadership which is more rooted in collective practices and much more in the production by a team that can offer Colombia a transition that we need urgently. This mobilization makes it real, but we need a transition that is more calmer, with more certainty about the steps that we should take to move forward with the deep changes that we need in Colombia. The economy. There is a consensus among the coalition of Esperanza of how to restart the economy and do you want to change the economic model? And exactly how do you want to do that? Uh, let's start with the first question. How do we take a transition to restart the economy? Key element that we're proposing is an economy at the service of the citizens. We have a country where out of almost every two Colombians, one is poor. One of the most unequal countries in Latin America. We have rural reform is really belated. There's a major concentration of landowners, and we have one thing is to uh, strengthen the actions of the state, not make it govern, but make it more effective. Then the second point is the programmatic DNA. It's offer the public offer of health and education so that we can really make them turn them into rights, fundamental rights, like the Constitution says, but which is not really going on right now. The third thing, which is we haven't had a chance to uh, reach an agreement, it's the revision of the free trade agreements, which in Colombia, the countryside, has been devastating with respect to agricultural production that we would have in Colombia. And in my case, as a very much more feministic proposal, is the diverse economies. Colombia is a country that has a tradition of peasant solidarity traditions and economies, and these many of these proposals, which are neoliberal, have been threatening to that. In our case, and I think one of the key issues, and then fundamental niche that has to do with a redistributive economy. We have that as one of our proposals on this programmatic platform, a review to the tax laws in Colombia, what along with what we have in the Constitution, progressive, transparent, and effective. Thank you. So, in the short term, where would the money come from? You says where's the money coming from to pay the debt to meet the demand, social demands of those protesters, and where's the money coming from? Does that come from radical change? I don't want to use it radical in the political terms. No. How do we get to that point where we have money to not all that what you want to do by the coalition, but at least to get started towards the goals of the coalition? Where would that money come from? One of the proposals we've had is that in these times of the pandemic, the Van Dijk government created a fund to mitigate the pandemic, a fund which hasn't had the budget execution as expected. And for some petitions we've sent, he says that approximately 25 million of pesos are in that fund. We're also asking to abolish the tax reforms of 2019, which gave huge extensions to the business sector, and which today the business community is uh, pointing to that has some ways to get out of which we want that to be uh, abolished. That would create some about 5 or 6 billion. If, and also, if we had more political will, it's difficult. But we have one of the highest military expenditures, the second largest military expenses in Colombia. Right now, we have 39 billion pesos for war. Actually, we could, and it's possible, have transfer some resources. What Duque has said is to strengthen the a social policy which is tied to subsidies. We have a project of basic income which been moving from the bench of the opposition, and it's supported by the La Esperanza, and that could be a basic income, which right now we have spoken about as an emergency, but it has real backing. We've been working on this for a year with unorthodox economists in Colombia, and I would say that it is possible to have the resources from there. And of course, uh, uh, touch the equity, the dividends, the extensions. Colombia is a country, and the mission, yeah, according to tax experts, that if I look at called, we're one of the countries with the largest number of exemptions around the world, and that those exemptions haven't had any real follow-up to recognize the efficiency, and it's time to decrease those exemptions little by little. It's very interesting how you've been watching this conversation very much along the lines of the discussion that came around from these protests that, of the demands, which not only the committee for the uh, well, then but it's also have to do with the social policies and the restructuring of the more longer term that we're going to need to respond to these needs that the people are expressing in the street. And that's along the same path. One of the an additional argument that we've had with these protests has to do with the something that's had been happening for several years now, and they were showing the service. It's the the deficit in representation. Some people say it's a cliche, and you also speak about deficit of representatives, and it's not perfect. But the truth is that those surveys do show in Colombia that in institutions called democratic, they have lost a lot of legitimacy and credibility, specifically in the 2012 and 2013, where debacle and the credibility indices uh, dropped, and we haven't been able to recover them. So, in the Colombian case, is one of the most serious cases in Latin America of lack of legitimacy and credibility. So, those democratic institutions. So, you see that phenomenon like in Chile, whose partial results was seen last weekend, where all the demonstrations, they came to a constituent assembly to remedy that lack of connection between the state institution and civil society. And the question goes along several dimensions. Is that the road that we have to follow? Uh, and if that is not, do we need a political reform which is more reduced? What do we need to do to correct this deficit of representation that we find ourselves in? So people in the street, I've heard those activists say, my problem is not elections. My problem is not whether people don't vote or not. My problem is to present my demands on the street because I have no alternatives. But thinking more along the long term, that's not sustainable. Nobody survives based on demonstrations all the time. The democratic institutions were invented for some reason, and we try to restore them and make them uh, legitimate again. So where do you stand with this in much radical and uh, reform or a constituent of assembly or and my question is I think that there is no consensus from the coalition, and we know that we had this talk with several of you, and Cristo, for example, says clearly, he says, no, we have to open it up. Another constituent assembly, the way they're working right now, the constitution, they're not responding to the needs of the people. So what is your approach to that? I remember, Sandra, an article that you wrote about what happened in the States, and that you made a metaphor of what happened with the Congress in the US. It was said that they had created a medieval castle, which literally they were uh, escalating to be able to get there. I think that analysis of yours was very interesting. And now that we're going out of and listening to people, that's what people are saying. Oh, we are in an, like in a medieval castle, completely disconnected from the people, completely disconnected from the needs of the people. Congress, we have laws and laws processed, and I say 80% of those laws are against the people in the process, in the peace process. When we were supporting the peace process, the Juan Manuel administration, uh, he was absolutely a counter reform to the countryside. He increased the penalties when all these imagine what happening with the escalation of the police that became another army, which so there's a regime of lack of legitimacy more than center, right, or left. It has had been bipartisan, and it was closed. It was closed, and it didn't open any space. That is one of the reasons why we had the violence in the 50s. So this matter goes much deeper than representation, and we have especially an over representation of fact entrepreneurs, politicians, and so we needed to strengthen the institutions because this is a uh, dangerous and endangered democracy. We're in a democracy. We speak the discourses of 2000. We have 2,000 violations of human rights, and it dangers because that it means that what it means living in a country at war. About the constituent, I think that we have to um, have an urgent proposal right now because people are hungry. The young people, when you speak to them and you go walk out with them, and I do that all the time, they tell us we need education, we need revenues, we need health. A constituent that is going to take a lot longer, and we have to find the time and the space. We have a constitutional agreement, which is beautiful. It was, guarantor, and it did came after a major crisis with the terrorism and drug traffic, but it's been losing legitimacy. Almost 40 reforms to the Constitution have been denying the spirit of what it meant, that we could live with dignity in Colombia. So I think that the urgent thing now is a sort of assembly the territories. We've been in the territories. The young people want to be heard. They need mechanisms and methods to prioritize the agenda. The universities have made that offer of helping to, like what Jaime was saying, some of the rhizomes, it goes up, scaling these needs and these urgencies, and also to recognize that do they have a legitimacy that they can help for this. We have to do it right now, right here, to stop this barbarism. And I think we have to sit down. It's going to be debates of the coalition of the Esperanza. We have about a year to see if it's time to have a constitutional assembly. That's what Chile did to resolve that. Let's see what comes out of this election and this new configuration of the new constitution in Chile. And perhaps from that exercise, we can learn. I wouldn't risk a change in the constitution right now. Just a follow-up question, because I heard a question from the public. What do you think about reducing the size of Congress, the sizing of the reduction of the terms, no re-election, and that's it, and that the pensions that were given to the Congress would be the same as the rest of the Colombians? The reduction of Congress, I think that more than reducing the Congress, what we have to do is reduce the salaries of the congressmen who have asked about it. Because when I was in the Green Party with Angelica and Claudio Lozano, Claudio Lopez and Angelica Lozano, we had a lot of difficulties, and that's why we went to anti-corruption. Again, with having a bill to decrease because the gaps is unsustainable, not only for the congressman. The subdelegates of the district attorneys and everybody have salaries. The judges are extremely high salaries and produce all this indignation about this increasing the size of Congress. I think you could also discuss that. We'll have to look at what were the conditions for that and say that the departments that have been underrepresented in Congress, especially in the Senate, don't run the risk that they would be left out and that their voices and their demands would be left out. And I think that, again, we have to place the discussion on the table. We have to start processing that. And I think that decreasing the salaries, which produces so much indignation in Congress, would help about decreasing the size of Congress. That's just something, should be something to be discussed. The Centro Democrático has pointed it out. I think that the proposal perhaps it would be different from the proposal of decreasing the number of congressmen that we might be able to propose. In what sense would that be? Because perhaps what they want in the Central Democratic would be to maintain the representation of the factic powers and the powerful people. For example, would like to. There have been initiatives from the chamber. Herman Navas, Sangafara, Guaviare, Guainia, they almost never had a senator. They should have a representation in the Senate. That's never happened. And along those lines, I think that perhaps we should propose something to get the Senate to have national representation, which it does not. The Senate is a Senate for regional representation and is not an added value vis-a-vis the chamber, or where we have regional representation. So it would be very different what Centro Democrático is proposing. But salaries and look at this architecture of the institution, I think it's time to do that. Everyone in this concern needs to sacrifice some specific policies that you like so much. So we've spoken to other people, and some places are more centered or centric, as they describe themselves. So my question is, at the end of the day, with the consensus, the platform of the consensus de la esperanza, what are you going to be? What do you need to sacrifice to reach a consensus? I don't know what that is. Sacrifice. I don't want a veto in the coalition. And the debate would be a political. The debate would be programmatic. Not even the veto for the ultra right, because democracy, I don't think that vetoes don't operate. And that's been one of my conditions, not as a condition, because I know that this is discussing and there's differences there, but I think it's a key element here. I think that I would have to sacrifice perhaps something in my aspirations about the economy, more critical against neoliberal policies. I've been very firm about the aspirations of strengthening the presence of the state, because we have a fragile and weak state. And I think that there's a different outlook of where the state should be in our democracy in Colombia. Well, that would be something that I might have been able to sacrifice. What I am not willing to sacrifice is what I've called a state that takes care of people, protects all forms of life, and I would not be willing because besides I think so the added value that I'm contributing to the contribution to the coalition. They're all men. They are very, very outstanding people. And I come with my biography, which is for years and years I've defended that agenda, which is from the feminism for the all of Colombia, because we have an idea of transforming it to you have a feminist policy like the Canadian government. There's a lot to learn, of course, because you have to mention Canada at least once in the program. We don't get a penny from them, from the government, but we have to mention them because the world is becoming more feminine. What's happening in Chile, 52% of the people were already more than equal. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of young women um, looking for a place, looking for a place, and with major projects for transforming the country. So this is very interesting, and I think it's we have to continue fighting for it because it will help all of Colombia in a state which will not be a warrior state. It will be take care of. Sandra, allow me another question. It might be a coincidence, but are the four now the five? Of the five people, the only one to mention a radical change, not in the for the policy in Colombia about the change of war against drugs, all that policy. What was Juan Manuel Galan, if I'm not mistaken? Sandra, correct me if I'm wrong. Uh, is there a consensus, or is it a coincidence nobody else has mentioned that, or isn't there a consensus, or what? Yes, there is a consensus. There is a consensus. In fact, I supported two of the initiatives that Juan Manuel Galan and his line of the entire resources for the health of marijuana, and then a law that we also propose is a um, medical treatment or psychiatric or psychosocial treatment for consumers. And that's been a struggle of Juan Manuel's that we have to recognize, and which in at the time in the Green Party they have it. Right now it's been going in the Congress with an initiative from Feliciano Valencia, who's one of the uh, Indians from Green Cauca, which has a lot of that work in that direction, which after this many years and about 80 billion pesos spent in war against drugs has brought nothing. This point by Juan Manuel, which is result not only in Colombia but globally, has the support and has two separate in the program of the La Esperanza. We have an agreement, there's support, and we're pointing out not only a way out for the issue of marijuana. There are many states in the U.S. that already legalize it for recreational use, but also for to start moving forward in illegal crops. What we're doing is to comply with that. The fourth point of the peace agreement, that was a very judicious, well thought out development, and the plans for the substitution of crops for the rural reform. We have to do that. We have to continue that and move forward with its development. Allow me again to go back to the issue of the veto. I think there's a discussion, a conceptual discussion here, and how, on the one hand, for the center to be a center, so as not to be an object of criticism, and they have nothing, they it's not coherent or consistent or ideologically consistent. They need to group people who have agreements on certain things. That's basically means that not everybody feels in the center because you lose the meaning of the platform. But there's another principle, it's more pragmatic, I think, which is the eligibility. So you're trying to be consistent, but also to be winning elections. So, and to that extent, the more you try, the more effort you had, that translates into more votes and more possibilities of being elected. In terms of the consistency, uh, all the consistency of what you insisted, or sort of how hard this is, he says, not the objective, but also the how, the way to do the politics. And in those two areas, in the what and in the how, where do you think uh, you have the limits? Are there any limits from the political and ideological point of view? Not how to do the politics, from the political and ideological point of view. For example, my question is, do you those limits uh, cover Gustavo Petro? And how do the politics, not the how, the what, but the how, do those limits cover somebody like Vargas Lleras? So we just try to get an idea of whether this issue of the veto for you means total openness, or in your way of seeing things, are the limits a little broader than those established by other members of the alliance? The truth is that on it's a the politically differentiation, but the coalition of La Esperanza would have huge differences with a project like Vargas Lleras. Uh, for example, the attack he did against the tax reform was they dropped it, filled the glass. He says the tax on equity for that it was not admissible. With the military criminal law, uh, he always expanded the, which is by exception, and it's limited. Military justice is one of the kings of clientelism in this country. So I think there's a difference, and I think there are some limits. Let's take, for example, the ultra right for this authoritarian project that comes from the ultra right in Colombia. And I'm not talking about veto. I think that they should, they hope to do it completely democratically and differentiate themselves, because you submit an agenda proposal that people feel identified with and they can vote for it. On the other hand, because Gustavo Petro, what I feel is it's almost a personal affair of the veto. Because he went over the limit of recognizing that it's not the ideas, but also the people. And I think that's where you have this veto. I understand that we have to be different. Well, right now I'm on the other side, but right now, in recent events yesterday or day before yesterday, there's a couple of messages between Sergio and Petro, and uh, let me, because they express a debate that we have in the coalition of La Esperanza and the historical impact. So how far are we going to assume these two coalitions, which are opposite against Ivan Duque and Uribismo? How can find some relationships? That would seem impossible. But this is such a critical moment in Colombia that has led us to say not to think about an alliance, but at least to find that democratically we can be different. So I think that there are some limits. Those are the ideological proposals, the political proposals were not all the same, but at a given time, the question is, who would you have a little more affinity vis-a-vis what we from the coalition de la Esperanza have proposed? Something that differentiated us. Uh, uh, Dr. Duque, I think that it was very difficult for me to do, and I thought about it, but I felt that a coalition of Esperanza that we had Humberto de la Calle, who negotiated with the FARC, that we opened. I was one of the women who defended the peace process, that we had opened this dialogue why weren't we going to talk to Duque? Uh, that didn't happen with us. That's why you can see the differences in where you can say, well, no, we want to have an alliance now, but perhaps the specific time of the country will lead us to think how much we can broaden these bridges and find a common alliance. Right now, I wouldn't know. I don't see the conditions for that. I think it's legitimate for Colombia democracy that we have these two coalitions, that we have these two expressions, that we can differentiate ourselves when we start a campaign. That is going to be healthy for democracy in Colombia. But I also think that the project for the ultra right is the same from the historical pact. I think there are colleagues of mine that are wrong. Um, there's a huge difference between the projects, more democratic and one was, which is more authoritarian that the Uribismo has been proposing. We have a grammatical merger that gives an idea of what the stage is at. It works almost like a lapsus reading. I didn't feel it, but in the dialogue between Petro and Sergio, which was so stimulating for me, of these tweets that are refreshing for democracy, I think that we have to stop looking at each other like enemies and let's uh, an exercise of differentiation is not only the consensus and the discussions. We have a question from have you thought of a strategy to develop in terms of foreign policy? Are you talking about feministic terms? Do you have a feministic foreign policy? Let me see. How would that? How would you change your foreign policy from for Colombia? For example, towards the U.S. or Canada? I don't know. Uh, could be more for like for the United States. Do you need a radical change, modification for the foreign policy of Colombia? What do you think? And about Venezuela, for example, let's talk about several examples. What do you think about all of this? Internationally, we would have to say that I'm part of that, part of the Puebla group, where we went in a group of parliamentarians from Latin America and Central America, where we were discussing this. What does it mean to in the region to be able to have an agenda where you recognize not socialistic but also historically uh, some feministic situations, for example, in our relationships uh, among countries. In Colombia, the truth is that, especially in this administration, we haven't had we had a chancellery to try to find alliances. I think that a woman like Maria Geraldine did a very interesting job, which was rearrange the relations in Colombia as part of what she received from a previous authoritarian regime like Alvaro Uribe, and what it meant to prepare the Colombia and the world for negotiating the peace agreement. I would have a key element, uh, a bit of that agenda in international relations. We put Venezuela a part of that. We have to insist on a democratic way out of what's going on in Venezuela. The arrival of this diaspora from Venezuela is very painful, and it has to do, in addition to the dictatorship that we have in Venezuela, with the very, very bad management of international relations in Colombia. It's not only Venezuela, it's also with Ecuador, with whom we have very difficult relations. So I would say, as a key element, let me have a poetic expression that we have more than borders, we have neighborhoods. The difference with these countries are a few kilometers or a river, like in the case of Venezuela. And they have made us look at each other like enemies. An international job of this group of international, I'm talking about the Puebla group. There are many initiatives of parliamentarians are thinking, how would we have a regional agenda for Latin America and for Central America? And we're doing that. We're discussing, organizing, talking about Central America, El Salvador. What is the role of Colombia in a foreign uh, policy? What do you say about the president in Salvador when I think that are unconstitutional and very worrisome? What is the Colombian role of all of that? Or what could be the Colombian role of all of it? Colombia hasn't expressed an opinion because the truth is that over the last few times, we haven't had a chancellor uh, foreign relations, but they should mention something. Yes, they should. They should say something about what is going on in El Salvador with the steps they've taken, which are totally dictatorial. But the other day, I heard by the Ángela Robledo, whom I think that we did a very interesting job as a chancellor, that even in countries where there we have these regimes, you have to maintain a room for dialogue to be able to somehow contribute uh, for the region in these countries where the regimes are clearly authoritarian. Go back to the point uh, about Rafael Peñera, who said that about the foreign policy. This become an international movement uh, started by the Minister of Foreign Relations of Sweden, and several European countries have been adopting that. And it's thinking about looking at foreign policy as a tool, like many other policy, like a tool to facilitate and reduce discrimination and gender inequality. I think that should be looked at because in Colombia, when you think about foreign policy, I think they did more about security, cooperation, military cooperation with the U.S., uh, the war against drugs. So we've never imagined our foreign policy as a tool to produce changes, crucial changes, especially in terms of gender. I think that's an experience uh, that several countries have been reviewing that. I think that is a very interesting topic, and that's I want to go that way because the two things are very connected. Um, with something that has been constantly since the protest of 2019, and we continue with that. And the issue of education, it's something that everybody knows that those who go into elections in Congress who are not willing to uh, deal with this conversation about the people in the street, they don't have a chance. That is the conversation. Since 2019, this has been about the topic of education, access to education, public education. The government constantly repeats that nobody has invested as much in education, but the results in expanding the number of the ability of the public education system is still to be seen. And there are other related problems. For example, the debt uh, is not only is it takes it's a other number of entities, banks. It's a huge problem. The problem of access and of going out to uh, into the labor market. This is completely deteriorated. It doesn't offer except anything except service contracts without being ability to learn. It's very negative. What about that? What is What is your approach? What is your diagnostics? What is your proposal? What I was saying that is part of our task in the coalition is to prioritize education. A lot of us here come from the world of academia, and we've followed the reivindications of the young men and women in this respect. I spoke about ISATEX because ISATEX became a bank like anybody that lends money to the kids in this country. They come out of the major universities with uh, debts of 100, 120 million pesos and no chance to pay it back. So I think that we propose reviewing that ISATEX and also to review the financial banking that lends to families and to the kids. And that has to be limited and has to be correct because coverage in many of the higher education, especially university, has based on credit, and that has to be reviewed. In Colombia, for many years, we haven't had any, we haven't created any public. We're not, they're not being funded or founded. There are proposals of universities for the indigenous people, for the Afro peoples in the territories from the university or regional for national university, which have a major effort. They've reached to the Amazon, they've reached Putumayo. Uh, there's a proposal from the University of Nariño in Tumaco, which one of the places where the people, the kids don't have any chance, and they're uh, blood, the coca crops. So they need a state that invests basically in education and strengthening uh, public education. But also, you have to go to the other end of the process of education, which the education of the younger children, kids from 0 to 5, which in Colombia, that major responsibility falls on the women, especially the poorer women. And there is no offer of education to start with that process of training from the early years until the university. I think that Sandra would have to review this cycle. There's a lot of research about it, a lot of proposals, uh, uh, but also because mobilization of the students is done based on private universities. The tuitions of those universities in Colombia are exorbitant, are truly, really impossible to pay by a family. And I think that's, we also need to, the students are asking for more democracy of the governments in the universities and agreements with private universities, with the families to help them with the tuition. So we have to look at that as a whole, from the early years all the way to the university. And of course, um, something about the Constitution. I would think that the Constitution says uh, something that hasn't been developed, which is the work statute. That's a huge debt for the past 30 years in Colombia. Something like we had from the opposition, which the opposition, but the labor statute. It's there, but it's not been developed, and that we have to do with the work where employment is at an end, and we have to find a way to find jobs and income for the people. When I look at a picture of the members of the coalition, La Esperanza, I see them all white, of a certain age. Oh, yeah, yeah. I have nothing against the elderly, but and two women, I think. But when I look at the faces of those who are in the streets, I see a great variety of faces, and they are not upper echelon. What does that tell us? Is there a gap between, if there's a gap or not? And if there is, how can you close the gap between the leaders of the coalition La Esperanza and the people in the street, the people who are not represented in at least amongst the leadership of the coalition. It's true, we are older. We are, yes, we don't have indigenous women represented in this, or the Afro women, or the young men and women. And I think that's, it not only happens to us, but also it's a historic pacto histórico, and also the right and ultra right aspirations. It has to do with that break that we had between the political class and the world, the citizens at large, and with a country at war, which for many many decades we confined literally the these citizens manifestations. How to resolve that? I've been working for many years hand in hand with social organizations. I never come to the Congress if I hadn't been supporting both in the world of academia and hand in hand with these organizations, trying to open spaces for discussing going out and traveling all over Colombia. But there is a crisis of representation. We hear that everywhere, and means also a crisis of representative democracy. That's a proposal on the table. How are we going to close the gap? I think that following this mobilization, uh, listening and listening, because all we have done is that, listening to, but politicians speak a lot, and we need to listen and listen to what's coming out of that. And because otherwise, how are we going to do it? That democracy, it's one of the major challenges that I see in the world, in democracy, direct democracy, and representative democracy. How do we set up channels with the third item, which is discussion, which the deliberation. I think that triad we can find some room for making a big effort to represent. I, with all due respect, I think that I represent uh, a group of women for a long time ago in this country, and I've been able to get some laws and some work in the Congress where they feel that they're reflected. But I cannot say that I represent all the women in the country or all those feminist standards. I have a level of representation. I I always, based on a collective issue, but there's a big, huge break. And the task right now, in a positive reading, optimistic reading for what's going on, is that we can weave this relationship between, there's a country that is broken not only because of the war, because what is happening on right now. One last question, Angela. What is the state of the art in the coalition? Where are you at? What is the plan? This is since we have I guess like about every couple of weeks, we've been following up on these conversations and the state of things. So that's the time to ask you about it. What is the status of a coalition? Sandra always has some secrets at the end. As for secrets, let's see. Uh, well, it's a very complex process because you have dynamics of a party, the Green Alliance, Alianza Verde, and the coalition where no one has a party. And we've come from movements. We represent something of some mm, parties, but we don't have a party. That's made it very difficult to have this coalition because in the Alianza Verde, you have a number of instances that they make decisions. Everything's done by consensus. That's one of the principles of the um, I think it's very valuable for them, but makes decisions slower. And there's a process that we're going to select a candidate to go to the coalition a La Esperanza. Now it is open up into to 10 candidates, and that makes it much more difficult to operate. And I can say that here, it's no secret. We're looking for some rules to make the operation more clearly, where the Green Party has a huge weight. And we appointed some delegates. This group of our candidates, the let's coalition one and the Green Party, to see how we can make some decisions that will enable us to move forward, to present a proposal, but make it also some political impact. Because 10 candidates make it very difficult even for the citizens to understand. It breaks, fragments the message. It doesn't allow to consolidate a proposal that we want to make Colombians. That might work in 10 at a certain time, but we have to find some mechanisms. We're there. This is what we're doing. Um, we're insisting on having, on reaching an agreement vis-a-vis these rules, so they can move forward with the coalition. I hope that we can do it. What I've said, it's a value for the Coalition de la Esperanza, which is this plurality, this diversity, with a lot of shortcomings, like I was saying, but we're making a major effort to weave the society. We hope we make it. Let's see, when you have the talk with Sergio 2 weeks from now, you can have a little more, a few more advances. We're trying. We're making the effort. Let's see. Let's see if we can make it. Thank you, Angela. We've come to the end of an hour and a couple of minutes more. Thank you once again for your comments. Um, Transparent, and I hope that people who haven't been able to see this live, we can see the video, where we will hang on your website, Canada Canada.com. Thank you, Sandra, and all of those who are listening to us and want to continue with the series about looking for center in Colombia. As I said at the beginning of the webinar, we're going to have next Wednesday, the 27th, I think, at 10 a.m. Colombian time, and 11 with Toronto time, Sergio Fajardo. And we also have the webinar with for Chilean experts about interpreting the results of the voting last Sunday, and on June 7 June, another seminar about interpreting the results of the presidential election in Peru. With this, thank you, Sandra, once again. It's been a pleasure, as always. Thank you once again, Ángela, and thank everybody who has been with us. And as we said, Jairo Botero, the interpreter, and Marta Black, our vice president, who organizes all of this and makes it all possible. Thank you very much. Thank you for your invitation. Thanks, Canada, for making this possible.